I never expected that a burst pipe would dismantle my life. But then, my life was a structure built of such fragile things. It was a fortress of solitude, meticulously designed and curated. My apartment, 2B, was its nerve center. Every book was alphabetized, every surface was clear, every day was a perfect, predictable loop of freelance graphic design work, quiet meals for one, and the low hum of the city filtering through double-paned glass. It was safe, it was orderly, and it was profoundly, achingly lonely, a fact I acknowledged only in the deepest hours of the night, when the silence was too loud to ignore. My life had a museum quality to it. I was the curator and the sole visitor, wandering the quiet halls of my own existence, admiring the careful arrangements from a respectful distance. This extended to the world outside my door. I observed, I catalogued, but I did not touch. And the most prized exhibit in my secret collection was the man who had moved into apartment 2A, directly across the hall. His name was Julian. I learned that from the little cardboard sign the movers had taped to his door. He was an architect. I gathered from the large drafting tubes he sometimes carried and the faint, pleasant scent of paper and graphite that would occasionally trail him down the corridor. He was, to put it simply, a masterpiece of casual masculinity that I felt wholly unqualified to even stand near. He was tall, with shoulders that seemed specifically engineered to handle the weight of the world, or at least the heavy oak door that led into his apartment. His hair was a dark, unruly mess that he was always trying to push out of his eyes, and his voice, when I overheard it in the hall, was a low, calm rumble that vibrated through the floorboards and settled somewhere deep in my chest. He became the centerpiece of my observational routine. I learned the rhythm of his days. The sound of his shower at 6:30 in the morning, a muffled rush of water that was somehow more intimate than it had any right to be. The solid, reassuring thud of his boots on the landing at 7:15. The jingle of his keys, a sound so distinct I could pick it out from any other in the building, just before the click of his lock in the evening, usually around 7. He was a creature of habit, much like me, but his habits seemed to connect him to a world of substance and purpose, while mine only served to insulate me from it. The barrier between us was not just the 6 feet of hallway carpet. It was a chasm of my own making, dug deep and wide by years of self-imposed isolation and the quiet, persistent fear of rejection. In my mind, he was unattainable, a fixed star in a constellation I could only ever chart from afar. I built an entire narrative for him, a life filled with weekend trips to the country, dinners with brilliant, beautiful people, and a girlfriend, probably named something classic and elegant like Claire or Amelia, who laughed at all his jokes. I had no evidence for any of this, of course, except for my own ingrained certainty that a man like him could not, ever exist in the same orbit as a man like me. He was solid ground. I was just a ghost haunting the hallway. My admiration was a secret, silent thing. I would sometimes stand at my peephole, a pathetic and slightly shameful ritual, just to watch him lock his door. I catalogued the way the muscles in his forearm tensed, the focused set of his jaw. On the rare occasions we passed in the hall, I would offer a tight, nervous smile and a mumbled hello, my heart hammering against my ribs as if I'd just run a marathon. He would always return the greeting with a slow, genuine smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners, and that low voice would offer a "Hey, how's it going?" that left me flustered and tongue-tied for the rest of the day. The scent of his cologne, something clean and woodsy, like sandalwood and rain, would linger in the air long after he was gone, a phantom presence that was both a comfort and a torture. This was my life, a quiet, ordered loop of observation and yearning, all conducted from behind the safety of my reinforced emotional walls. I was content with the arrangement, or so I told myself. It was easier to admire art from a distance. You could appreciate its beauty without ever risking the terrifying possibility of touching it and finding out it was real. You could never damage it, and more importantly, it could never reject you. My world was stable. My walls were high. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon in October, I heard a sound like a gunshot from the direction of my kitchen, and the entire structure came crashing down. The disruption began not with a bang, but with a gurgle, a low, menacing sound from behind the drywall, followed by a dark, spreading stain that bloomed across the ceiling like a malevolent flower. I stood frozen in my living room, watching in horror as a single drop of water broke free, then another, then a steady, relentless drumming against my pristine hardwood floors. My carefully ordered world was literally dissolving around me. Panic, cold and sharp, seized my lungs. This was chaos. This was an invasion. Within an hour, my apartment was a disaster zone. The superintendent, a weary man named George, had shut off the water and delivered the grim verdict. A main pipe in the wall between my unit and the one above had burst. The damage was extensive. It would take, he said, looking at the sagging, waterlogged ceiling, the rest of the week, at least. Probably the whole weekend. He told me to call my insurance and find a hotel. I stood in the middle of my living room, surrounded by the smell of damp plaster and the ruin of my sanctuary, and felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. A hotel. For days. The thought of leaving my space, of being adrift in the sterile anonymity of a hotel room, felt like being cast out into a stormy sea. My routines, my safety nets, my carefully constructed walls, all of it was gone, washed away in a flood of rusty water. I must have looked as lost as I felt, because when I stepped out into the hallway to get some air, clutching my phone with a trembling hand, a voice pulled me from my daze. "Everything okay over there?" Sounded like Niagara Falls for a minute. It was Julian. He was leaning against his doorframe, dressed in a simple gray t-shirt and jeans, his arms crossed over his chest. His expression was one of genuine concern. My mind went completely blank. All the pre-rehearsed, non-committal greetings I practiced flew out of my head. I managed, my voice sounding thin and reedy. "Pipe. Burst. It's a mess." He winced in sympathy. "That's rough. Are you going to be able to stay here?" I shook my head, feeling a lump form in my throat. "No. They have to tear out the ceiling. Landlord said it'll be days." I guess I need to find a hotel." The words tasted like defeat. Julian was quiet for a moment, his gaze thoughtful as he looked at me, then at my open door, then back at me. I could feel his stare like a physical weight, and I suddenly became hyper-aware of my paint-splattered sweatpants and the fact that I probably looked like a drowned rat. I braced myself for a polite, "Well, good luck with that," before he retreated back into his own perfect, orderly world. Instead, he uncrossed his arms and pushed himself off the doorframe. "That's ridiculous. Don't go to a hotel." He took a step toward me, closing the distance in the hallway until I could smell that faint, clean scent of his soap. "I have a spare room. It's not much, just a bed and a desk, but it's clean and quiet. You can stay with me until they get your place sorted out." The offer hung in the air between us, a shocking, impossible thing. My brain struggled to process it. Stay with him? In his apartment? The museum was inviting me to spend the night. It felt like a trap, a trick of the light. My anxiety screamed at me to refuse, to make an excuse, to run. It was too much, too close, too fast. It was a breach of every protocol I had ever set for myself. But then I looked at his face. There was no pity in his eyes, only a simple, straightforward kindness. And I thought about the cold, impersonal silence of a hotel room and the chaotic, damp ruin of my own apartment. And for the first time in a very long time, the fear of connection was marginally outweighed by the exhaustion of being completely and utterly alone. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't want to impose." He gave me that small, crinkle-eyed smile, and it was like a crack of light in my dark, panicked mind. "It's not an imposition. It's just an empty room. Seriously, take it. It's better than the Hilton." And so, with a mumbled, "Okay, thank you," I agreed. I agreed to step over the threshold. I agreed to walk into the exhibit, to breathe the air, to leave my fingerprints on the glass. I grabbed a duffel bag, threw in some clothes, my laptop, and my toothbrush, and walked the 6 feet across the hall that had always felt like 600 miles. As I stepped into his apartment, the door clicking shut behind me, I felt the last foundations of my old, safe world give way. I was in uncharted territory now. Navigating the new boundaries of Julian's space felt like learning to walk again. His apartment was the inverse of mine, where mine was stark, minimalist, and cool-toned. His was warm, lived in, and textured. Architectural drawings were pinned to a large corkboard on one wall, filled with elegant lines and precise calculations. Books on design and history were stacked in neat, thoughtful piles on the floor next to a worn leather armchair. The air itself was different. It was saturated with him. The faint, lingering scent of his coffee from that morning, the woodsy notes of his cologne that clung to the upholstery, the clean, almost imperceptible smell of his soap. It was overwhelming, an intimacy I was not prepared for. He showed me to the spare room, which was exactly as he described it. Simple, clean, with a comfortable-looking bed and a small wooden desk. "The bathroom is just there," he said, pointing down the short hall. "Make yourself at home. Seriously. Kitchen's open. Help yourself to whatever." He lingered in the doorway for a moment, as if unsure of the protocol for this strange, sudden cohabitation. I was just as lost. I felt like a foreign exchange student, dropped into a culture whose customs I couldn't begin to understand. "Thank you," I said again, feeling the inadequacy of the words. "Really, you have no idea." "It's nothing," he insisted, with a little wave of his hand. "We're neighbors," he paused. "I'm Julian, by the way. I don't think we've ever actually introduced ourselves." "Liam." I managed my voice tight. My heart was doing a frantic, fluttering dance against my ribs. He knew my name now. I was no longer just the quiet guy from 2B. I was Liam. I was a person sleeping in his spare room. The first evening was a tightrope walk of awkward courtesy. I tried to make myself as small as possible, staying in my room, pretending to be busy on my laptop. But the smell of garlic and tomatoes soon wafted under the door, a silent, fragrant invitation. I emerged to find him in the kitchen, stirring a pot of sauce, the sleeves of his shirt rolled up to his elbows, revealing strong, capable forearms dusted with fine, dark hair. "Hope you like pasta," he said, without turning around. "It's pretty much the only thing I know how to make." "I love pasta," I said, my voice coming out too eager. I felt a flush creep up my neck. This was a domesticity I had only ever fantasized about, and living it was both intoxicating and terrifying. We ate at a small wooden table in a corner of his living room. Our knees brushed together once, a fleeting, electric contact that sent a jolt straight through me. I pulled my leg back so quickly I almost knocked my water glass over. He didn't seem to notice, or if he did, he was kind enough to pretend he hadn't. We talked, haltingly at first, about our jobs. I tried to explain graphic design in a way that didn't sound like I just sat in a darkroom staring at a screen all day, which was, essentially, what I did. He spoke about architecture with a quiet passion that was mesmerizing. He talked about the way a building should feel, the play of light and shadow, the responsibility of creating a space that people could truly live in. My hyper-awareness of him was a constant, humming current beneath the surface of our conversation. I noticed the way he held his fork, the way he'd look up at the ceiling when he was thinking, the low, rumbling timbre of his laugh. Every small detail was a revelation, another piece of the man I had only ever observed from a distance. The real Julian was so much more complex and captivating than the idealized version I had constructed in my head. Later that night, I lay in the spare bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the apartment. The quiet hum of his refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards as he moved around in his room, the soft rustle of his sheets. I could hear him breathing, a slow, steady rhythm that was a strange and profound comfort. I was separated from him by only a thin wall of plaster and drywall, and the physical proximity was a sweet agony. I was a guest in the heart of my own secret obsession, and the air was thick with a tension that was almost entirely of my own making. The next day, a Saturday, the tension deepened. He had work to do from home, spreading blueprints across the dining table, and I had a design project with a deadline. We worked in a companionable silence, the only sounds the soft scratch of his pencil on paper and the click of my mouse. The quiet was more intimate than conversation. It was a shared space, a shared purpose. Once, I got up to get a glass of water and walked behind his chair. I paused for a fraction of a second, my eyes tracing the strong line of his back, the curve of his neck. The urge to reach out, to place a hand on his shoulder, was so powerful it made my fingers ache. I curled them into a fist and walked away, my heart pounding. That evening, as the sky outside darkened to a bruised purple, a storm rolled in. Rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled around the corners of the building. The power flickered once, twice, then died completely, plunging the apartment into a sudden, deep blackness. I let out a small, involuntary gasp. Whoa. Julian's voice came out of the darkness, startlingly close. You okay? Yeah. I breathed, my eyes struggling to adjust. Just surprised. I heard him moving, a soft shuffling sound, and then the flare of a match illuminated his face in a warm, flickering glow. He was holding a candle, the flame dancing in his eyes, casting dramatic shadows across the strong planes of his cheeks and jaw. He looked like a figure from an old painting. Emergency stash, he said, his voice a low murmur in the sudden quiet of the powerless building. I'll light a few more. He moved around the room, and soon the space was filled with the soft, wavering light of half a dozen candles. It transformed the apartment into something else entirely, something ancient and intimate. The hard edges of the modern world were gone, replaced by a soft, golden intimacy. We sat on the sofa, the storm raging outside, the silence inside broken only by the drumming of the rain. It was in this strange, timeless space that he began to talk. He spoke of a project he had poured his soul into, a community center that had been canceled at the last minute due to budget cuts. He talked about the frustration, the feeling of failure. And then he spoke of moving to the city a year ago, after a long-term relationship had ended, leaving him feeling unmoored, disconnected. It's funny, he said, staring into the flame of a candle on the coffee table. You can be in a city of millions of people and feel completely, totally alone. His words struck me with the force of a physical blow. He had just articulated the central, unspoken truth of my entire adult life. This man, this paragon of confidence and capability that I had placed on a pedestal, felt it too. He had cracks in his facade. He had vulnerabilities. In that moment, he ceased to be an object of my admiration and became something far more dangerous, a person I could deeply, truly connect with. The carefully constructed distance between us, the barrier of his perceived perfection, crumbled into dust. He wasn't a piece of art in a museum. He was just a man, sitting in the dark, feeling a little bit lost. Just like me. I don't know how long we sat there, talking in the candlelight, the storm providing a soundtrack to our quiet confessions. I told him about my own anxieties, the way I used my work as a shield, the comfortable prison I had built for myself in apartment 2B. It was more than I had shared with anyone in years. The words just came, drawn out of me by the safety of the darkness and the quiet, non-judgmental presence of the man beside me. At some point, I must have shivered, a reaction to a sudden gust of wind rattling the window pane, or maybe just the emotional chill of laying myself so bare. Julian noticed. He shifted on the couch, and I felt the warmth of his body as he moved closer. You're cold, he stated, his voice soft. He reached for the thick woolen blanket draped over the back of the sofa and, in one smooth motion, unfurled it. Instead of just handing it to me, he draped it over both of us, tucking it around my shoulders, his arms settling behind me on the cushions. The sudden proximity was dizzying. His body heat radiated through my shirt, a solid, grounding warmth that seeped into my bones. I could smell the faint, clean scent of his skin, the subtle fragrance of rain on his clothes from when he'd taken out the trash earlier. My entire nervous system lit up. Every nerve ending was on high alert. I sat perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe, afraid that any movement would break the spell. The air between us grew thick and heavy, charged with all the unspoken things that had been building for the past 48 hours. The rain on the window was the only sound. I could feel the rhythmic, steady beat of my own heart, a frantic drum against the quiet of the room. I chanced to glance at him. He was already looking at me, his face illuminated by the flickering candlelight. His expression was open, searching. The crinkles at the corners of his eyes were there, but he wasn't smiling. It was something more intense, more questioning. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The question was there, clear as day, in the slight parting of his lips, in the way his gaze dropped from my eyes to my mouth and back again. My mind screamed at me. It was a cacophony of fear and desire, a lifetime of caution warring with a single, overwhelming moment of want. This is a mistake. You're misreading this. You're going to ruin everything. But beneath the panic, a quieter, more honest voice whispered, this is it. This is real. He started to lean in, a movement so slow and tentative it was almost imperceptible. It gave me every opportunity to pull away, to turn my head, to break the contact. It was a silent offer, not a demand. And in that moment, I made a choice. For the first time in my life, I chose not to retreat behind my walls. I chose chaos. I met him halfway. His lips were softer than I could have ever imagined, and warm. The first touch was hesitant, a gentle, questioning pressure. It wasn't a kiss of passion, not yet. It was a kiss of discovery, of confirmation. I felt a shudder run through my entire body, a release of tension I hadn't even realized I was holding. His hand, which had been resting on the back of the couch, came up to cup the side of my neck, his thumb stroking softly against my skin. The slight rasp of his stubble was an electrifying texture against my cheek. I tasted the faint remnants of coffee on his tongue and something else, something that was just purely, unmistakably him. I let my eyes fall shut, surrendering to the sensation. The ordered, predictable world I had so carefully maintained was gone, burned away in the warmth of this single, impossible moment. My internal world short-circuited. There were no thoughts, no anxieties, just a white-hot flare of pure feeling. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was the feeling of a locked door swinging open for the first time. The kiss deepened, becoming more confident, more sure. My hand, which had been clenched into a fist on my lap, uncurled and found its way to his chest, resting over the steady, solid beat of his heart. It felt like an anchor in the storm, both outside and within me. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. The candle flames danced, casting our shadows, now intertwined, against the wall. He rested his forehead against mine, and I could feel his warm breath on my lips. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was profound, filled with the weight of what had just happened. The walls were down. The art had come to life, and I had no idea what to do next. The morning after was a study in cold, stark reality. The storm had passed, and the power was back on. The magical, candlelit intimacy of the night before had evaporated with the dawn, leaving behind a harsh, fluorescent silence. Julian was already in the kitchen when I woke up, the smell of coffee filling the air. But something was different. He was standing with his back to me, staring out the window, his shoulders tense. The easy, comfortable presence he usually exuded was gone, replaced by a rigid stillness. "Morning," I said, my voice sounding rough and alien in the quiet apartment. "Hey," he replied, without turning around. His voice was flat, clipped. He poured a mug of coffee and pushed it across the counter toward me, still avoiding my eyes. The simple gesture, which would have felt like a kindness yesterday, now felt like a transaction, a dismissal. I took the mug, my fingers trembling slightly. The warmth of the ceramic did nothing to combat the ice forming in my stomach. The awkwardness was a physical presence in the room, a thick, suffocating fog. We stood in the kitchen, just a few feet apart, in a silence that was louder than any argument. It was a chasm of unspoken regret, and I was certain it was all my fault. My anxiety, which had been temporarily silenced by the shock and beauty of the kiss, came roaring back to life with a vengeance. My internal monologue became a relentless, torturous loop of self-recrimination. "You idiot. You absolute, complete idiot." He was being kind. He was vulnerable because of the storm, and you took advantage of it. You misread everything. He felt sorry for you because your apartment was flooded, and you mistook pity for affection. The thoughts spiraled, each one more venomous than the last. He's straight. Of course, he's straight. It was a moment of confusion, a weird, dark and stormy night fluke, and now he's disgusted with you. And with himself. You've not only made him uncomfortable, you've made him question himself. You've ruined the one good, kind neighborly connection you've ever had. Now you have to live across the hall from this monumental, crushing awkwardness, for the rest of your lease. I watched him as he moved around the kitchen, his motions stiff and economical. He was acting completely normal, but it was a brittle, forced normality. He was distant. He was a million miles away. His retreat was all the confirmation my panicked brain needed. He regretted it. He wanted me gone. The emotional chasm between us, standing there in his sunlit kitchen, felt infinitely wider and more impossible to cross than the physical distance of the hallway had ever been. The warmth and connection of the night before felt like a dream, a hallucination brought on by low light and emotional vulnerability. Today, in the harsh light of day, all that remained was the shame. I retreated to the spare room, my coffee untouched, and began packing my small duffel bag with a frantic, desperate energy. I had to get out. I had to escape the suffocating weight of his regret. I would rather sleep on the plastic-covered floor of my ruined apartment than spend another minute in this space that now felt hostile and alien. Every object, every scent that had felt intoxicatingly intimate just hours before now felt like an accusation. I could hear him on the phone in the other room, his voice a low, indecipherable murmur. He was probably calling his girlfriend, Claire or Amelia, telling her about the crazy, pathetic guy from across the hall and the mistake he'd made. The thought was a fresh stab of humiliation. I zipped my bag with a sharp, final tug and walked out into the living room, my eyes fixed on the front door. My escape route. He was standing there, his phone now back in his pocket, as if he had been waiting for me. His face was a mask of unreadability. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The polite but firm rejection. "I'm really sorry if I gave you the wrong impression," speech that would echo in my head for the next decade. I braced myself for the impact. "I was just going to go check on my place," I said quickly, preemptively, holding up my bag as evidence. "Thanks again for everything." The word everything felt loaded, dangerous. He didn't move. He just stood there, blocking my path, his jaw tight. He took a deep breath, the kind you take before diving into cold water. "Liam," he said, and my name on his lips was no longer a comfort, but an indictment. "Can we talk for a minute?" There it was. The 5 words I had been dreading. My stomach plummeted. I wanted to say no, to push past him and flee back to the relative safety of my own disaster zone. But I was trapped, by politeness and by the sheer force of his presence. I gave a small, jerky nod, my throat too tight to form words. He gestured toward the sofa, the scene of the crime. I sat down stiffly on the edge of the cushion, my duffel bag clutched in my lap like a shield. He didn't sit. He paced, running a hand through his already messy hair, a clear sign of agitation that did nothing to soothe my frayed nerves. Finally, he stopped and turned to face me, his expression earnest and shot through with a nervousness I had never seen in him before. "Look," he began, his voice lower than usual, "about last night." He trailed off, searching for the words. I decided to make it easy for him, to perform the merciful act of finishing the sentence he was struggling with. "You don't have to say anything," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I get it. It was a mistake. I misread the situation. I'm sorry. I'll just get out of your hair." I started to stand up, desperate to end the excruciating conversation. "No," he said, his voice sharp, stopping me in my tracks. "That's not it. Sit down, please." I sank back onto the cushion, confused. He took another deep breath. "I'm the one who should be sorry. I was weird this morning. I was a complete ass." He looked at me, his eyes filled with an apology that seemed to go deeper than just his morning moodiness. "I wasn't pulling away because I regretted it, Liam. I was pulling away because it scared the hell out of me." I stared at him, my brain struggling to parse his words. Scared? Why would he be scared? I haven't felt like that with anyone in a very long time, he continued, his gaze dropping to the floor. "And it was just a lot. And I'm not good at a lot. My default setting is to build a wall and analyze the structural integrity from a safe distance." He let out a short, humorless laugh. Architect humor. He looked back up at me, and his vulnerability was a raw, open thing. "The truth is, I've noticed you since the day I moved in. The quiet guy in 2B who always looks like he has the entire world figured out on his laptop screen, but seems terrified to make eye contact in the hallway." He offered a small, self-deprecating smile. "I engineered at least a dozen accidental run-ins at the mailbox, just to get you to say hello." My mouth felt open slightly. This was impossible. The narrative I had so carefully constructed, the one where I was the invisible observer and he was the unattainable star, was being systematically dismantled before my eyes. "When I saw you in the hall yesterday, looking so completely lost after your pipe burst, it wasn't just neighborly kindness, Liam. It was an excuse. An opportunity one couldn't pass up." He took a step closer. "I wanted you here. I wanted to get past the 30 seconds of awkward hallway greetings." A thought surfaced through my shock, a piece of evidence from my old, flawed theory. "But I saw a picture on your mantelpiece. Of you and a woman." He followed my gaze to the photo, a silver-framed shot of him on a beach, his arm around a smiling blonde. "That's my sister, Kate," he said softly. She and her wife live in Oregon. His sister. Not Claire. Not Amelia. The final pillar of my incorrect assumptions crumbled into dust. He wasn't straight. He wasn't unattainable. He was just nervous. Like me. The relief that washed over me was so profound it felt like I could finally breathe again after being underwater for years. The knot of shame and anxiety in my chest loosened, unraveling thread by thread. All this time, I had been painting a masterpiece of my own insecurities and hanging it in a frame of his perceived perfection. I had been the curator of a museum of my own fears. I've been watching you too, I confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush of air. Since you moved in. I thought. I just assumed you were. I know what you assumed, he said, his voice gentle. Most people do. It's easier that way, I guess. For them. Not always for me. He closed the remaining distance between us, sinking to his knees on the floor in front of me, so we were at eye level. He took my hands, which were still clutching my bag, and gently pried my fingers open, lacing his with mine. His touch was warm, solid, and real. Last night was not a mistake, he said, his voice a low, steady rumble that vibrated right through me. It was the scariest, best thing that's happened to me in a very long time. And my only regret is that I let my own stupid fear make you think for even a second that it was anything less than that. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, tears of relief, of disbelief, of a joy so potent it ached. He had been just as uncertain, just as hopeful, just as scared as I was. We were two men, hiding in our own quiet apartments, building walls and admiring each other from across a hallway that might as well have been a canyon. He lifted one hand to my face, his thumb brushing away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. So, he whispered, his eyes searching mine. Can we try this again? The morning after? I couldn't speak. I just nodded, a wave of emotion clogging my throat. And then he leaned in and kissed me again. This kiss was nothing like the first. There was no hesitation, no question. It was a kiss of profound, soul-deep relief. It was sure and deep, and tasted of coffee and apologies and the promise of a new beginning. It was a kiss that said, "You're here. I'm here. We're okay." It felt like coming home. The new beginning was quieter and more wonderful than I could have imagined. We navigated the new dynamic with a kind of gentle, reverent care, as if we were handling something precious and newly formed. Julian helped me move my salvage belongings back into my apartment a few days later, once the contractors had finished their noisy, dusty work. The hallway between our doors no longer felt like a border crossing. It was just a path, an extension of our shared space. Our first official date was that Friday. We didn't go out. Instead, he cooked for me in his kitchen, something other than pasta, a surprisingly delicious roasted chicken he'd learned from a YouTube video. We ate at his small table, and this time when our knees brushed, neither of us pulled away. We just smiled. The conversation flowed easily, no longer punctuated by my anxiety or his reticence. We talked for hours, learning the small, important details of each other's lives. His childhood in the Midwest, my obsession with vintage sci-fi book covers, the shared, secret belief that we were both old souls who had been born in the wrong era. The intimacy between us deepened in 1,000 small, quiet moments. It was in the way he started making an extra cup of coffee in the morning and leaving it on my doorstep. It was in the way I would leave a new design I was proud of on his desk for him to see when he got home. It was in the comfortable silences, sitting on his couch, my legs thrown over his lap, both of us reading. The physical affection that had once been a source of such terror for me became a natural, easy language. A hand on the small of my back as I passed him in the kitchen, his fingers idly tracing patterns on my arm while we watched a movie. A quick, soft kiss, just because, as one of us was leaving for the day. One evening, about a month later, we were lying in his bed, the room dark except for the moonlight filtering through the window. The rain had started again, a gentle, drumming rhythm against the glass that was no longer a catalyst for drama, but a soothing, familiar sound. "You know," Julian murmured, his voice a sleepy rumble against my ear, "I've been meaning to send a thank you card to your superintendent. That burst pipe was the best thing that ever happened to this building's plumbing." I laughed, a real, uninhibited sound, and turned in his arms to face him. "Oh, really? I thought you were just taking pity on the pathetic, drowning man from 2B. He grinned, the moonlight catching the curve of his smile. I'm a saint. It had nothing to do with the fact that I'd been trying to figure out how to talk to you for 2 months. He paused, his expression turning more serious. Are you sure you don't want the middle? He asked, referencing a long-ago conversation we'd had about sharing a bed. It had become our inside joke, a callback to the first tentative steps of our relationship. No, I whispered, pressing a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. I'm exactly where I want to be. Lying there in the quiet darkness, wrapped in the warmth and safety of his arms, I thought about the man I used to be. The man who curated his loneliness like a precious collection, who lived his life behind reinforced walls, admiring the world from a safe distance. That man would never have believed this was possible. He would have seen it as a disruption, a dangerous breach of protocol. He would have run from the beautiful, terrifying chaos of it all. But he was wrong. The chaos hadn't destroyed me. It had saved me. I had risked everything, my safety, my solitude, my carefully constructed order, for a connection I wasn't even sure was real. And in return, I had found something more solid, more stable, and more real than any wall I could ever have built for myself. I had found Julian. And for the first time, my quiet little corner of the world didn't feel like a fortress. It felt like a home.